Hiya folks, I'm Jake, though in this domain I more commonly go by the Gladding Gladiator. And if you don't know who I am, I'm the guy that made a 3-hour video defending the Ice Age franchise and a whole bunch of other discussions on animated films and TV shows because it is a medium I adore with my entire being. Growing up, I was so hopelessly obsessed with learning about the animation process and the creatives behind my favourite pieces of media. I've probably watched the behind-the-scenes documentaries of several Disney movies far more than I've watched the movies themselves. Even though I gave up on my dream of moving to America to become a storyboard artist long ago, that love and admiration remain as strong as ever. And the reason I love animation so dearly is that it is a method of storytelling not bound by any limitations. Worlds far removed from our reality yet still have the power to make us look inward and reflect on our own lives and experiences, often allowing many people to truly feel seen for the first time. It's a living, breathing work of art that connects with us on such a profound level, from our earliest memories to our darkest days. Or that's what I wish I could say, because over many years, but especially this decade, animation has been brought to its knees by greedy entertainment executives ready to throw the entire industry and everyone who works in it under the bus to boost their own salaries. Engaging in shady business practices to avoid paying their workers, sabotaging their shows, that is, if they decide to even release them at all, and now they seek to remove the human touch from an innately human form of expression. As an industry in entertainment, animation has always been just as shady as any other, but in the past decade, and with the rise of streaming, it has reached a fever pitch that has become impossible to ignore. Creators of your childhood shows are having to part with their collection of old production art just to get by. The people who drew your favourite characters can't find work anymore, and those that can are pushed to their breaking point, picking up responsibilities outside their job description only to still struggle to survive. I've touched on or made offhanded remarks in several of my videos about the precarious and uncertain future, but recent events and the current negotiations between the Animation Guild and the AMPTP have coaxed me to make a full discussion, because y'all, the animation industry is dying. Let's find out what's killing it. Stop me if you've heard this one before. A new animated show just premiered its first season consisting of 10 episodes on the hot new streaming service. It releases and you watch it and then nothing. Until a few months later when there's suddenly a surprise announcement it's been renewed for a second season, which will be dropping fairly soon. Well, surely if it's been renewed, it must be doing pretty well. So you watch the second season and then shortly after you suddenly see the announcement the show has been cancelled. And you're left confused, because why would they renew it for a second season, then immediately cancel it? Well, it's because you've been lied to. There is no season 2. There never was. What you saw was merely the final episodes of season 1. Before the streaming wars took place, most TV shows typically had around 20 episodes per season, with the idea being networks would premiere that run of episodes in the fall and conclude it by the end of the following spring, taking the summer off before starting the next season. You can still see this practice in effect with the Fox animation lineup. However, whenever a TV series would get renewed, that would give the writers and actors a chance to negotiate for better pay, since the show they make is successful. Makes sense. And when it comes to animated series, streamers are still following that process, ordering shows with a contract for around 20 episodes. Only now they take that season order and split it down the middle, advertising them as 2 separate seasons. This means studios don't have to deal with those pesky workers and their odd desire to make enough money to support themselves, essentially getting 2 seasons for the price of 1. And now this shady practice wasn't invented by Netflix. Cartoon Network famously took the 3 seasons they had already ordered for Steven Universe and split them into 5 without informing the crew, who were still deep into production, leading to pacing issues in the 2nd and 3rd season that were never meant to be there, which of course people blamed the writers for. And this wasn't the only show affected in this way, as earlier the same thing happened with the series Uncle Grandpa, which was then quietly cancelled afterward. The reason it has become commonplace this decade is simple. Animation is seen as entirely expendable to these streamers because they don't follow their business model of chasing trends by following an inconsistent and incomprehensible algorithm. Before the advent of streaming, word of mouth was a crucial element to a show or movie being successful, because things need time to find and grow an audience. But today, companies aren't willing to give shows the time required for that to happen, cancelling anything that doesn't immediately take off so they can move on to the next thing. And their constant killing sprees aren't just something they do for fun, it's an integral part of their business model. Streaming services are only ever interested in obtaining new subscribers rather than pleasing current ones. If you signed up to watch one show, they already have some of your money, meaning they no longer care about what you want. So they move fast and cancel popular shows so they can make other ones which the algorithm tells them will attract more new subscribers. Hence why after the first season, cartoons on streaming services receive no advertisement because executives are no longer interested in the show and have already moved on to something else, even when that show is tied to something that was already successful. It's a sentiment we've all become quite familiar with. Why is Hollywood so obsessed with sequels and reboots? What happened to all the original ideas? Well, that brings us back around yet again to, surprise surprise, the mysterious algorithm that tells executives brand recognition is more valuable than original stories. Ignoring the fact those marketable IP were once themselves original ideas that no one working on them thought would last more than a single season. And let me clarify. Reboots, sequels, and revivals are not inherently bad. One of my favourite cartoons of the past decade is a reboot. Behind every production are people genuinely trying their best to make good art despite the circumstances, and no one should be subject to harassment because they worked on a show you didn't like. This is still a paying job, and I'm not going to hold it against anyone for taking any work they can get, especially with times being as desperate as they are. That being said, this over-reliance on returning to older properties signals a lack of risk-taking and insecurity from the executives, because as previously established, they don't want to spend time and money building up a new IP when there's an old one in the closet they can dust off. Hence why you have Craig McCracken, one of the most successful cartoon creators of the last 20 years. After being burned by Netflix, he returned to Cartoon Network, a studio he helped build into a household name, only to be told they weren't interested in any of his original ideas, they just wanted him to make more Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and Powerpuff Girls. Though when rebooting old properties, often studios will not even bother trying to get staff members of the original on board or attempt to restrict their involvement. Paramount's latest reboot of the Ren and Stimpy show is the second attempt at bringing back the long controversial 90s Nicktoon, despite sexual abuse allegations surrounding the creator. Awful acts he was able to commit due to the success of this show. Even with him not being involved, many have argued this was a stained property that was better left in the past, with the victims speaking out against Paramount's tone-deaf attempts to revive and continue profiting off something that has caused nothing but pain for so many. Crew members of the original series took this job simply because they needed work, but were restricted from the writer's room despite promises from executives that they would have creative input on the series. And with this story, people are placing the entire blame on the reboot's writing staff rather than on the executives who not only allowed but likely orchestrated this situation, because they wanted a show that appealed to fans of the original in name alone while chasing an audience that was never going to be interested in a Ren and Stimpy reboot. So they brought on people from the old show simply to avoid any potential backlash from not involving any of the old guard, then didn't allow them to contribute in any meaningful way that would have helped shape the production into something that had a chance of gaining an audience. But here's the kicker about all these old shows returning. The executives don't care one iota about these reboots, because if they did, why are they still treating them the exact same as their other shows? Last year saw the revival of two beloved adult animated shows, Clone High and Futurama. An early 2000s one-season wonder people had been begging to be brought back for 20 years, and an institute of science fiction that has been revived so many times I'm convinced the writers are all secretly necromancers. When new episodes of these shows started to roll out, it was a big deal backed by huge advertising campaigns. But then the next batch of episodes the following year did not receive such fanfare. Clone High Season 3 was unceremoniously dropped earlier this year with a single trailer, then swiftly cancelled again. Futurama is in a better position, though still not great, as most people were not even aware 10 more episodes had been released. Though Hulu had already committed to producing 20 more episodes, which makes even less sense why they've been barely marketing it lately, but at least it means the Planet Express crew lives to die another day. Futurama and Clone High are prime examples of streaming services mining old properties to bring them back purely for publicity. Because once that hype cycle ended, they were pushed to the sidelines because, as far as executives were concerned, they'd done their jobs and fulfilled their use to them. The thing is, between all the revisitation of cherished IP, there are still plenty of original ideas being produced. You're just not allowed to see them. This whole situation has been developing for years, but if there is one thing we can point to as the smoking gun for what we are seeing currently unfold, that would be corporate mergers and tax write-offs. Putting it simply, a corporate merger is never a good thing, which especially rings true in the world of entertainment. Less production companies means less competition, which is not a healthy thing for any industry because it results in less creative ambition. When art becomes entirely monopolized, in some respects, it ceases being art and becomes a product. But the business side of these deals creates as many, if not more problems, because when one company acquires or is acquired by another, it also takes on any previous financial issues, mainly debt. This is what we've seen happen to Warner Bros. Over the past several years, which has been significantly damaged by two different mergers. First, in 2018, they were purchased by the telecommunications company AT&T, which by 2020 was $170 billion in debt, hoping their purchase of Warner Bros. Would generate enough revenue to save their sinking ship. With any merger comes intense restructuring in which many jobs and projects are placed on the line. One of these casualties was Trick Moon, a Cartoon Network pilot created by Geneva Hodgson, which was hugely successful online but did not move forward despite the overwhelmingly enthusiastic reception from fans, which was only a harbinger of what was to follow, because a few years later in 2022, AT&T and Warner merged with Discovery, with their CEO David Zaslav taking over.
Some people
Tasked with saving the company billions, he wasted no time cutting back spending and purging as much content from their platforms as possible, with animation taking the hardest hit. Learning with Pibby was a short animation uploaded by Adult Swim to YouTube on Halloween of 2021. The story follows the main character of a children's educational series as their life gets uprooted when a mysterious glitch starts affecting the multiverse and takes away her best friend. Now she and some unlikely allies must jump from Warner Media Show to Warner Media Show, attempting to escape and maybe figure out how to stop the darkness before it consumes everything. Due to its innovative take on the multiverse crossover and old school creepypasta vibes, the short was a phenomenal success, currently boasting over 37 million views, which should have been fantastic news for creator Doge Greenlee, who had been working on his vision for a Pibby series for years by that point, which had already been passed on by Cartoon Network, with him labeling the short as the trailer for his show. However, with it blowing up, it seemed a future for Pibby was very much on the cards, thus Doge continued development, with fuel only being added to the fire with Adult Swim's April Fool's broadcast a few months later.
Pretty please help us? Why aren't you saying anything?
As well as this billboard, which attracted loads of attention as everyone waited for an inevitable announcement. And they kept waiting, and waiting, and received nothing but radio silence, until a friend of Doge revealed the series was officially dead. As I said, Cartoon Network had already passed on the series before the short even premiered, and despite there being proof there was an audience clamouring for this and letting the creator continue full-time development on the project for years, they had not changed their mind, rejecting the pitch multiple times. Executives took this man's years of passion and artistic vision and used it solely as marketing stunts designed to promote their floundering streaming service, despite having no intentions of taking it any further. Corporate mergers have led to a nightmare scenario for any artist that wasn't already laid off as a result, where even if a project is fully finished, it might not even be released, which is where tax write-offs enter the picture, where a studio is able to claim back the money spent on a project if it fails to meet expectations, with the stipulation they can no longer profit from it. Cartoon Network has done this a few times in the past, which is why several shows from the catalogue can legally never be viewed on American TV again. So suddenly Warner projects began to be cancelled and written off left and right, with no one being safe, not even the most beloved and iconic characters in the company's history, because if one franchise has suffered the most from this practice recently, it's been the Looney Tunes. Throughout the 2010s, the Merry Melodies cast had been on a steady decrease in relevance, but heading into the 2020s, the franchise seemed to be heading for a turning point, only for most in development projects to be cancelled and subsequently written off, including Coyote Coyote vs. Acme. Announced in March of 2022, only to be removed from the studio's theatrical release schedule a month later, suspiciously right after the Discovery merger. The crew continued working on the movie, fully wrapping production, only for Warner to announce the project had been written off for $30 million and would never see the light of day. And it wasn't alone, as it was shelved alongside two other films, one being an animated Scooby-Doo film, with the crew having to finish post-production knowing no one but them would ever get to see it. Imagine you worked on a project for 3 years, pouring your heart and soul into something you would be proud to release into the world, and watch as people fell in love with what you've made, only to suddenly get a phone call one day telling you that will never happen. Because that is the situation facing countless people in the entertainment industry for the past few years. If there is a way for studios to make more money by not releasing a finished product, the system is fundamentally broken, setting a precedent that anyone's hard work can be ripped away from them at a moment's notice, even including those that have already been released. A huge trend this past year has been content purges on streaming services, where original and exclusive titles are unceremoniously removed, leaving audiences no legal way to access countless shows and movies. Final Space, created by Olin Rogers, was a sci-fi dramatic comedy that ran for 3 successful seasons over multiple years and was vastly approaching the endgame, only for it to suddenly be removed from HBO Max and, you guessed it, written off for taxes. Infinity Train, the show picked up following its pilot unexpectedly blowing up online, was cancelled despite it not only continuing to pick up steam, but the crew already having the rest of the stories planned out. But the one that hurts the most for me was Mau Mau Heroes of Pure Heart, created by Parker Simmons. An endlessly entertaining show about a found family of heroes trying to become legendary, only to find themselves as the sole protectors of Pure Heart Valley and its denizens who lack any sort of survival instincts whatsoever. The reason I feel the most strongly about Mau Mau is it helped me through a very difficult time. The show premiered summer of 2019, right as I was moving to university, which was an anxious and scary time for me. But this show significantly helped me during that difficult transition, and because of that, I became so attached to these characters. Mau Mau had the makings of Cartoon Network's next modern classic, and executives at the time felt the same, as a second season was announced the following year during Comic-Con 2020, including an animatic of one of the upcoming episodes. This was the last thing we ever saw from the show. Season 2 was never released, and in 2022, Mau Mau, Infinity Train, and many other Cartoon Network shows were not only removed from streaming, but many social media posts or YouTube videos relating to them were taken down, as if none of them ever existed, though a lot of these have since been reinstated. Then the latest example of this awful practice comes not from Warner Bros, but the House of Mouse. Disney Channel's newest animated series, Haley's on It, ended its first season on a cliffhanger in May of this year with no word on a second season, which was very out of the ordinary for the network. Then in October, Disney announced the series would not be renewed and proceeded to remove the show from Disney Plus altogether. But why? Why are they doing this? Well, because the streaming model is not as strong as these companies want you to think. However, they can't simply go back because that would mean admitting their failure. The streaming bubble is unsustainable and could burst at any given moment, so studios are scrambling to make as much money as they can before that happens, removing any content that doesn't meet their ridiculous expectations to avoid paying royalties. This is the world we are heading towards, in which companies can on a whim make a piece of entertainment completely inaccessible, in which writers and artists' entire work history can be deleted at a moment's notice, making it even harder for them to find work in the future. In my videos this year, I have been doing something new. Whenever I talk about a specific scene or episode or any element of the production, I try and credit the creatives responsible wherever I can. The reason I do this is to highlight how behind every piece of media you love are numerous talented creatives working together to create something, an effort to humanize people who often remain thankless, and showcase how every creative brings something of their own to every project, that if removed would fundamentally change that piece of media. And we must recognise the creativity and collaboration that goes into making something like this, because the studios are already trying to take that away. Currently, a record number of animation workers remain unemployed, many for upwards of a year, which sounds insane because we are not that far removed from the pandemic. When the world completely shut down, animation was one of the few creative industries able to keep going unhampered by the circumstances, and because of that, studios finally began seeing how important the industry was, greenlighting new animated projects all over the place to a point where it seemed we were on the precipice of the biggest boom in animation since the 90s. It was a very exciting time, but it was short-lived. Once people decided things could return to normal, so too did the attitude of executives, who swiftly cancelled every single one of those projects. Despite carrying the entertainment industry through unprecedented times, animation has taken a vast brunt of the fallout in the aftermath, becoming victim to numerous cost-cutting measures that have significantly harmed the very same artists who kept these studios afloat. And let's make one thing clear, none of this happened overnight. Everything I have talked about, or will talk about later in this video, were all problems long before the pandemic. Executives have always held contempt for the medium of animation. All the post-pandemic era did was give them yet another justification for those attitudes. Traditionally, television productions would have an assigned team of writers responsible for every episode of the season. They would collaborate, pitch ideas, and bounce jokes off each other, all working with the common goal of putting together the best 20 minutes of television they possibly can. This was a writer's room, a practice that led to the most influential shows of all time that remain celebrated all these years later. However, keeping all those talented writers constantly on staff costs money. Thus, studios have realised they could simply hire freelance writers to work on their shows to keep costs down, regardless of the negative impact this would have on the end product. Studios doing everything to avoid paying writers is a dire situation because of the state of residuals in the age of streaming, which are far less than what they used to be. Previously, if you had contributed to a film or episode of a TV show, you would receive a cut of the profits every time it was subsequently aired. However, with streaming still being relatively new and a wild west in terms of legality, corporations are getting away with paying writers less and less, which was one of the main pillars behind the writers and actors strike last year. However, animation writers are still fighting for those same protections because they are treated differently and significantly worse than writers for live action, who tend to view animation as a less legitimate medium. But things are bad for them also, so what we've ended up with is a disturbing trend of live action writers going into animation because they believe it will be easy money, taking jobs away from people who trained for them and understand the medium, only to discover how difficult and time-crunching working in this industry is. You may wonder, how on earth are these studios still constantly releasing new material when they keep firing all their employees? Well, allow me to introduce you to the job creep. One of the many underhanded ways studios make their revenue look good is by downsizing their workforce to reduce spending at the end of the financial quarter. However, even though they've let go of a majority of their artists, they've still gotta make new stuff. Or else, how are they going to make even more money? Simple. Slowly make the limited amount of staff that remain do all those other jobs, taking small steps until this unmanageable workload has become the norm. So storyboard artists become animatic editors and character designers and writers, producing more work for the same amount of pay. Both the previous points are especially harmful when it comes to board-driven animated shows where episodes are written the same time as they are drawn. This is the best example of how normalized the job creep and lack of payment have become. Despite these people taking on the jobs of both writers and story artists, they only get paid for one of those roles, which is the standard on a majority of 11-minute cartoons. Which brings us to Inside Out 2. Did y'all see it? I assume you did. I absolutely adored the film and consider it a near-perfect sequel. And I'm not alone, because it recently became the highest-grossing animated movie of all time. An absolute win for Pixar at a time they dearly needed it. Pixar fired 175 employees right before the film was released, including many who worked on it. Then, when the film was a smash hit, they did not receive the bonuses given out as a result because they were only for active employees, despite the fact they worked for countless hours on this film during what many have described as one of the worst time crunches in Pixar's history. But believe it or not, it could have been worse. They could have been working at DreamWorks, a company notorious for mass layoffs, but last year saw perhaps their biggest one yet with the announcement the studio will no longer be producing films in-house, instead outsourcing all their animation duties to other studios, at least until they can get AI to make them. Last year, DreamWorks founder and enemy to artists everywhere, Jeffrey Katzenberg, was all too giddy to claim that within the next 3 years, he'll be able to fire 90% of his staff and replace them with AI, a system in which movies are made entirely by an algorithm trained on stolen artwork that lacks the humanity and passion that makes animation what it is. A machine cannot infuse a drawing with so much personality that it truly comes alive. A machine will never connect with audiences by relating to our lived experiences, all because studios are trying to turn art into a factory assembly line. Though this shouldn't be all too surprising for Jeffrey Katzenberg, who during his decades working in entertainment has shown nothing but contempt for creatives. Remember that next time you say DreamWorks is in its redemption arc or that it's carrying the industry. Especially when you have cases like Kung Fu Panda 4, an installment in one of the studio's most successful franchises being restricted and cut down by executive mandates, limiting the runtime because the chart says children don't watch longer films. I beg to disagree, giving it to a director who had no experience with the franchise and rejected any attempts to deepen the story. Then who could forget attempting to cut the Furious 5 until fan outrage caused them to tack on a quick silent cameo, no doubt crunching the animators even more. All of these while the actual creatives are trying everything they can to save the film but keep getting shut down by the higher-ups. Following the actors and writers strike, studios are now cracking down on animation, taking away budget and employee benefits in an attempt to steal back the money they lost in the negotiations. And they think they can get away with this because of how a lot of the entertainment industry and general public look down on animation workers. I debated including this part, but I think it's an important aspect of the issue. Many animation fans hold such an apathetic attitude towards artists. They care about animation in theory, but they don't care about the people who make it, viewing entertainment solely as content to be judged, which enables these studios to continue their awful and predatory practices. One of the things that spurred me on to make this video was the recent cancellation of the Max series Velma, which is endemic of much of what I've talked about here. It's a show trying to have its own identity while being forcefully connected to an older IP run by someone who had no business being in charge of a cartoon that was dogpiled on as soon as it was announced, despite it being clear a lot of people were passionate about working on this. Then when it was announced to be getting a second season, people blamed hate watching instead of realizing these next episodes were already far into production before the show had even premiered. And finally, it was announced to be cancelled and everyone rose from their chairs in thunderous applause and celebration, not even considering how a bunch of people just lost their jobs. And yeah, I didn't like it either, but what I didn't do was go on Twitter and demand anyone who worked on the show be blacklisted from the industry. To so many, these artists' value as people is entirely dictated by whether or not they worked on something you happen to like. Then when people in the industry vent their frustrations and hope people will take them seriously, they get told if you don't like working for the studios, just go indie. Like it's the easiest thing in the world. Going indie is not the all-encompassing solution you think it is. Yes, indie animation is wonderful, but it's also a costly risk that not everyone is in a position to take. People don't seem to understand that animation takes time and money, and all to work towards something that isn't guaranteed. Lackadaisy and the amazing digital circus are fantastic and will have significant impact moving forward, but you also have to consider they just got lucky that enough people discovered them right after they launched, so they were very quickly profitable. For every one of those, there are 100 other projects made by passionate individuals who are struggling to find their audience and funding. Below this video and on my channel page are a bunch of indie animation projects and creators you should check out, as well as links to watch the Indie Presentation Night Volumes 1 and 2, which are hosted on the Animation Appreciation Hub, a collective I am part of that brings together cartoon YouTubers and indie creators to help uplift the medium, who have all been incredibly supportive while I've been putting this script together. So, where does all this leave us? You've listened to me rant about the state of the industry for who knows how long, and by now you're likely sick of listening to me talk about it. Well, so am I. Do you think I want to be here making this video? I don't get any joy from this. Right now I'm supposed to be making a fun and unreasonably long Wallace and Gromit retrospective, but instead I'm here, trying desperately to convince people of what should be the default opinion. That the people who dedicate themselves to making art solely for our entertainment deserve enough money to be able to live and not have to constantly worry about being laid off unexpectedly. That the industry is fundamentally broken and requires complete and utter reform yesterday, and that these malicious and shady business practices have to be put to an end before it is too late. The Animation Guild is in the trenches right now, protesting this lack of fair treatment as executives continue to tear apart the industry for scraps. But change will only occur if we, the public, actually attempt to do something about it. Because if we don't change our consumer habits by not supporting studios who outsource their entire production, making our voices heard that animation workers deserve a better contract, and not becoming desensitized to these horror stories of mass layoffs, then the fight is already lost. Because that means they'll just keep getting away with it. And this doesn't just stop at those currently in the industry. Right now, there are kids growing up watching shows like The Owl House, Craig of the Creek, and Hilda, which are inspiring them to pick up a pencil and dream of one day getting to make their own cartoons. And I don't know about y'all, but personally, I want to live in a world where they get to tell their stories. Folks, thanks for sticking around for all of this. This has been so far beyond anything I've ever done before, and I'm sure there are things I missed or could have gone into more detail regarding or could have explained better, but this is obviously something very important to me, and I just felt like I needed to get something out there. If you head on over to Blue Sky and other social media, you can follow Animation Workers Ignited, who have done a great job getting the word out there regarding the current Animation Guild negotiations and have been an invaluable source of research for this video. Links will be in the description, as well as the aforementioned indie projects, along with more resources to help support animation workers in their fight for a better contract. Also, a huge thank you to my friend the Wacky Deli for helping me write this script and ensuring I have all my bases covered. A link to his channel can be found down below as well. Until next time folks, I've been the Gladiator and I'll see ya real soon.